We have our last session now, and I'm really, really thrilled to have here with me for this session Professor Kathleen Stock and Helen Joyce, who some of you may have heard of. So Helen Joyce was the Economist's Britain editor, and before that she edited Plus, which is an online magazine about maths. So Helen's a mathematician. I'm so impressed. That's published by the University of Cambridge, and was founding editor for the Royal Statistical Society's magazine Significance, Respect. And she's the author of Trans: When Ideology Meets Reality, which was an Amazon top 10 bestseller. And Professor Kathleen Stock was a professor of philosophy at the University of Sussex, and she regularly discusses gender identity ideology and its effects on women and girls in public writing and speaking, and was awarded an OBE for services to higher education in 2020, which we're all thrilled about. And she is the author of Material Girls: Why Reality Matters for Feminism, published in 2021. So I'm going to go to you first, Kath, because your book was published before Helen's, and ask you the same question I've been asking everybody, which is what made you feel it was important to write your book? What brought you to doing that? Why did you think it was important?
Well, I took quite a long run up, so I found myself in a position, I think, that was quite interesting intellectually, in that I was a teacher at Sussex University near Brighton, which is basically the heart of the LGBT community in Britain. And Sussex, through being at Sussex, I was seeing from about 2015 onwards, I think I noticed the way that Stonewall propaganda was filtering through the institutions. And I was also a director within a school, so I had responsibility for teaching and learning within the school. So I was in lots of management meetings and hearing, and just observing. I was also a philosopher, so I was seeing how in philosophy, in the academic community, there was this incredibly weird, non-philosophical approach to gender ideology that was being promulgated by some very loud voices, and nobody else seemed to be disagreeing. And then I was also a lesbian. So I was thinking about all that and just watching. And then I started to think I had to say something in 2018, when I'd been watching people like you, Stephanie, online, and Women's Place and Magdalene Burns, and reading loads of blogs that, massive grassroots impetus was building, and it was really inspiring. People like Lily Maynard. I was reading, loads and loads and loads of people. So I started writing some blogs, and they started to get some attention. And then Helen actually got in touch with me. People started to approach me. I think it's probably common to everybody in this panel that, once you come out, suddenly you're really popular. People want to talk to you and they want to tell you their story. And I met some of the clinicians that have been talked about today very early on, and Helen approached me and said, we want to do something in The Economist about this. And so she commissioned me to write a piece for The Economist. So anyway, basically that's how it started. So by the time I started to think about a book, I had been kind of battle scarred already for several years, really. Lots of terrible things had happened to me, or at least things that were very stressful. But then this agent, Caroline Hardman, approached me out of the blue and said, you can write. Would you like to write about gender identity? And I thought, yes, I have this opportunity because I understand the philosophical background. I have the capacity to do that. And a lot of the ideas here are sort of quasi-philosophical. They're not very good, but they do present as this kind of, with this intellectual veneer of respectability that comes from academic philosophy. And I thought, so yes, I thought I couldn't do anything historical, but I thought I could communicate clearly about why these ideas were very misguided. And so Caroline helped me get a pitch together, and then we put it out to publishing houses. and everyone rejected it, apart from one brave editor, Ursula Doyle at Little Brown at Fleet. And thank God she did take it on. But she was very brave to do so. And both my editor and my agent have suffered consequences as a result within the publishing industry. So then I just got on with it, and I wrote it in 2020, and then it came out in May 2021. And it was, Little Brown's a mainstream publisher, so I felt quite pleased that this was going to reach, I hoped, a big audience.
And perhaps the indication that publishers are beginning to be a bit braver, that there is a demand, there is a market for these books.
They weren't. They are now.
You spoke at a Women's Place meeting in Brighton, didn't you? That I missed because I was on holiday that week. I was gutted to miss it. Well, that was 2000.
That was 2018 as well. So that was after I'd done my initial blog post, and then actually Helen Saxby,
yes,
the famous Helen Saxby.
It was her fault. Yeah.
She asked me, she met me in a cafe, and I felt like I was a spy. We were keeping our voices down. She said, "Do you want to speak in Brighton at a Woman's Place?" And I thought, oh my God, because I knew what that would mean. But I said yes. So, and that was a very extreme and initiatory experience into the world of into this world, because there was protesters all over the place, and people taking our photographs really aggressively and putting them on social media, and the police were doing nothing, that sort of usual thing. But yes,
but you actually had the courage to speak at a public meeting in the town of your university. So it was it
was one of the scariest things I've ever done.
One of the things that I think is so powerful, the panel here, everybody is showing their face, using their names, and I think that's a huge statement in itself. It's why I think these books are so important, because it's a huge message of, yes, I have a right to say this, I have a right to publish on this. Thanks, Kath. Helen, what brought you to this subject and the decision to write a book about it?
So I was international editor at The Economist, which is a section that runs a different.
Sorry, did I get that wrong?
No, I've done various jobs there. Okay. Yes. So when I was international editor in 2017, one of the commissioning editors said to me, literally sat down next to me at lunch and said, "Strange thing happening, kids coming home from school and saying such and such is trans. What's that about?" And the pair of us went, "Don't know." And I said, "Do you want me to find someone to write about this?" And I initially commissioned somebody I thought would write something really good. And what came back was the oddest and most inexplicable first draft I've ever seen on any subject in 17 years at The Economist, which managed to write sort of 2,000 words about gender without ever mentioning that there is sex or why there is sex or what male and female mean or anything about bodies or how we reproduce And I was completely puzzled by it. And I had this conversation with him and he sort of reworked it. And in the end, it was just unusable because it just made no sense. And unlike Kath, I was completely unaware of any of what was happening. I had studied mathematics at university. I was writing, I'd gone out and I'd been in Brazil in 2010 to 2013 as a foreign correspondent. I hadn't seen Julie Bendel's article. I hadn't seen Suzanne Moore's. I hadn't seen any of it. I literally knew nothing about it. So it was inexplicable to me. So I started to look into it and I started to get very worried. I found all the same articles. I found Transgender Trend, I found Lily Maynard, I found Fourth Wave Now. And in the end, about sort of, maybe it was as long as a year later, I just ended up writing the article. All that survived from the original version was the first paragraph. And I look back and I think that article was about 70% there. And then I just kept reading, and the following summer, I became just really very seriously worried, and almost on impulse, I went to the editor and said, "I think we need to do some viewpoint essays on this subject, try to get people across the spectrum." And I am still proud of doing that. I did manage to get some quite strident trans activists who would, of course, now regard me as a Nazi and a Holocaust denier and genocidal maniac who wants to kill children. But they did write, as did Kathleen, as did various other people. And I've been told that did help, to break a sort of a logjam. but I just kept worrying about it. And I suppose I was worrying intellectually. It was too strange and too weird, and I couldn't understand why people were saying and doing the things they were doing. And then in the summer of, I think it must have been the summer of 2019, I did that thing that everyone talks about as going down the rabbit hole. You hear this expression all the time, either that or through the looking glass, where you suddenly feel that the whole world has flipped and nothing is what you thought it was before. The people that you thought were your tribe are not your tribe. The people you had respected are saying crazy things and so on. And it's deeply discombobulating. And so at that point, I thought, maybe I'm going to have to write a book, but am I the right person? And by this point, I was the finance editor at The Economist. This is not like my day job was nothing very compatible. And then I met detransitioners at the event in Manchester. And that was the day that I decided I had to write the book and I would take whatever came as a result. And then there was the usual, I couldn't find an agent. And then I found an agent and then she dropped me. And then Kathleen said, approach my agent. And Caroline was initially reluctant because it's not usually good practice to have two authors on similar topics because your agent tends to hold the foreign rights. So there's somewhat of a conflict of interest. But it was Kathleen who really persuaded her to. So I owe Kathleen a deep debt of gratitude on that front and always will. So our stories touched, but I suspect many people here, our stories touch in various ways. And then once I put the proposal out, I found just one person who was willing to publish it, but she published it. She was a dream. The publishers were great, and it hasn't been too bad.
Interesting. I remember I went and met Rob Gifford from The Economist in London for a coffee, and I said to him, so who's this Helen Joyce then? And he said something about, oh yeah, she's a very strong person, very strong. And it was such a relief because The Economist has really produced very good articles, very rigorous. And so, yes, I was so sort of relieved that there was somebody there that was, tough. And we all see women in particular being bullied in public and then crumbling and issuing groveling apologies. And I think when you sort of can trust that somebody is going to stand firm, it's such a relief, because I think everybody feels sort of held in that. So I'll go back to you, Kathleen. What's the impact on your life been of publishing your book? What's the feedback you've had, positive and negative? And
well, I published the book in May last year, and by October I'd left my job. So to some extent, I mean, I do the protesters and harassers at Sussex, I really am 100% sure did not read my book. I don't think they understand my views at all, and I think they're basing it on blogs or Twitter posts or whatever. But the book generated, it was reviewed positively in national newspapers, and I mean, I didn't get any book tours or festivals or anything like that. The book's still hidden in many Waterstones, but it was enough to annoy enough people that I think it did actually contribute, generally speaking or indirectly, to the action against me in my workplace. And of course, colleagues at Sussex that hated me anyway were enraged that I had managed to publish a book like that with a mainstream publisher that was getting well reviewed. So that's great. I really like to annoy those people as much as possible. And I think we can safely assume that they're very annoyed with me. But generally speaking, I had a great response. I think it was well reviewed. And then when I did leave Sussex, I got all these letters through Caroline and through my university address before I left. I got hundreds and hundreds of letters, and people were telling me what my book had helped them do. And they were just beautiful. So that was wonderful. And it's been translated now into German and Spanish. It's going to be translated into Korean, Hungarian, and Brazilian Portuguese. Wow. Sold a lot, for a philosophy book, for a popular philosophy book. I think, no, I've never looked into it, but I think it's sold pretty well, comparatively speaking. So I'm pleased.
Because I was thinking the world of academia, where I think we're all concerned about the lack of academic freedom. And so to me, your book is so important that you as an academic, as a philosopher, have published a book on this subject. And what you've done, again, it's so accessible. I mean, actually, with both of your books, it's such page turners. It's like, you know, this is a subject, you know, with your book, Helen, it's like, I know all this, but I was gripped, even me. And with your book, Kathleen, I'm not a philosopher, but the way that you define things, define words like gender, define gender identity, define sex, and it's all so clear. And you can't wait to find what the next bit is of the story. So I read both of your books in 1 or 2 sittings. I mean, I think probably 2 because I had to stop getting really late, but literally they were like, you know, plot-driven thrillers. But you know, the world of academia, you know, you've been instrumental, Kath, in bringing that to public attention, the freedom to, as a philosopher, examine these ideas. And I would imagine that there would be a sort of silent majority of academics who would be really grateful that you've done that.
I'm not sure about that, to be honest. I think academics are quite strange and isolated people. A lot of them still don't know what's going on. But it's true that in order to get that book published, and in order to write any of the things that I've written, really, you have to fight a battle on 2 fronts. You have to be saying the concrete stuff about gender identity and sex, and you have to be fighting for academic freedom, which is not anything I ever thought I would have to do. So you know, in the run up, I formed a network with Michael Biggs and Chetan Bhatt, an academic network, and started a Slack group where we could all organize together, and got hundreds of people involved in that. And I also wrote several letters to national newspapers about the way that Stonewall was chilling academic freedom in universities, and we all got, you know, any signatory got terrible flack. Michelle was one of the signatories, Heather. I mean, they will all have, lots of those signatories have their own stories about that, what then happened in their institutions to them, complaints, being dragged through processes for months, some of them, you know, being taken off certain courses, being told they couldn't have editorships anymore. You know, there's just a huge number of things that happened just to the signatories of those letters about academic freedom. And now when you see Oxford University being forced to explain how Stonewall has ranked them, I feel really quite proud that I think we started that conversation that is now playing out on a national scale.
You're muted, Steph.
Sorry. It's so interesting how you start things, you do things, and then you see the results years later. It's like a snowball. From that, comes that, and then the change happens. And sometimes we can't see it when it's happening. I think in the UK, because this webinar is necessarily UK authors, that books have played a huge part in that, and your books have really taken it, even though yours is philosophy, Kath, they've really, you know, they've sort of exploded the subject in the public consciousness. And, you know, I'm thrilled when I see your books in Waterstones.
So am I.
I move them to a more prominent position if they're not already, but they're in there, you know, and you know, so Helen, what's the response been to your book? Has it been those kind of opposites?
Yes, I mean, it's also changed my life and my career. So I'm currently on a prolonged leave of absence from The Economist, and I hasten to add, not because I was forced out in any way. They tried very hard to keep me. So I haven't experienced the sort of internal misery that Kathleen has. But of course, journalism is not far behind academia in being quite captured by these ideas. It depends where you are. If you're at the Times, it's one thing. If you're at the Guardian, it's another. Yeah. I would say, so it has changed my life in that what I'm doing now is working for Sex Matters, doing stuff there. And that's just so invigorating and so different. The response, I mean, the main thing that it has done is it has changed me, and it has changed how I think about people, institutions, and so on that I used to respect. I think really very much worse of most, you know, many charities, academia, journalism, government, all of these institutions than I did before. These used to be the places where policies would be hashed out and people would speak freely. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I question myself now. I question everything that I thought about the world before I discovered this topic. I think I was living in a fool's paradise. I was working for a paper that values evidence and, regards itself as technocratic centrist. And that's what I would have said I was, a technocratic centrist, And now, well, look where technocratic centrists have brought us. It turns out they're all Jobsworth cowards. So, when there's somebody who's saying, she's an anti-Semitic, Holocaust denier, genocidal maniac, homophobe, transphobe, sexist, fool, liar, etc., and I'm saying, hang on a minute, I'd actually just like to talk about the consequences of being male and female. It turns out that all the institutions that are supposed to be that holding the ring, go, ooh, there must be something wrong with her. She must have something bad about her, that they would say those things, instead of saying, that's an unnatural response. That's really a bit over the top. I'd better look into this more. So journalism and academia in particular are two institutions that are meant to respond to outrageous claims by examining them and, if necessary, discarding them. So is medicine, and none of them have. So it's not so much that I have been bullied or harassed or attacked or so on, although there were times that I worried about it. It's that it's changed me. I think it was Heather who said she's not the same person as she was before any of this. I'm certainly not the same person that I was either. I've lost a lot of respect for people I used to respect. I've come to understand a lot more about why some people whose ideas I didn't understand, why they think and act the way they do. And the strangest thing about it all has been this constant feeling of either being down the rabbit hole or through the looking glass. Nothing is the way it was. It reminds me very much of my first year in Brazil, when things looked like a sort of superficial or hollow. It's an experience that people have of culture shock, that things don't look right. The world looks a little off. And then after a year, I felt, oh, it all clicked, and I was in again. I understood people, I understood their body language, I understood what the culture was. So it's been that strangeness that has been the most abiding experience for me about this all. You've muted again.
I think you're probably reflecting what most people who've been working in this area feel, that it completely changes you, changes your life in some ways, but it also changes you as a person. Because what we're up against is so unprecedented. I mean, nobody wrote a science fiction book about this, did they, years ago? Nobody thought anything sort of this, outlandish could possibly happen. So I'm, what I think about, the progression that we've moved through in this webinar, sort of, according to a timeline, and that we've reached a point now with your two books where it really has catapulted this issue into the wider consciousness, into the wider public. It's changed the conversation in a really broad way. And I always like to, we've talked a lot about the people who do it first and the risks they take, that makes it easier for people. So I think there's going to be more and more books coming, but I see the sort of authors here today as the pioneering group who were the first to write. So you were the first to write for a wider public, and from your positions, which I think is really important, to have an academic, to have a well-respected journalist writing those books gives, I'm an amateur. I'm not I'm not anybody, and so it's people of your position have your positions and your livelihoods to lose. And I remember the bullying that Kath went through and thinking, well, thank goodness I work from home in front of my laptop, because would I have the courage to walk into that university every day? And I know what facing hostility feels like, but to have it in your workplace every day, I've got so much respect for you, and gratitude to you both for taking this issue, putting it out there, because I think whenever anybody reads a book, the unease they feel about a subject they don't really understand is clarified for them. And I think that's what both of your books do. So I'm going to ask you both my final question. Do you regret writing and publishing those books? Let's go first with you, Kath.
I'll just say one thing quickly with Stephanie, which is that I don't believe that you haven't suffered in the same way, and I know you have, and your bravery is absolutely immense. And if we don't get a chance to say that in the seminar, then I hope I can say it now. Yeah, no, of course I don't regret it at all. I mean, it's changed my life, like everyone else has said. It's made me realize what I'm capable of. I've never been able to really tell myself convincingly that I've been brave before, but I now think I can say that about myself, which is important to me. It makes me really very determined to speak out when I disagree with people, so I've carried on doing that, sometimes to my cost, but, I just think it's shown me how herds and mobs can operate, and it's shown me the importance of iconoclastic dissenters, who I never really understood before. I just thought they were a bit antisocial, but now I've realized that most of the women involved in this are a bit antisocial and difficult, and that's great. We need people like that. Society needs them. So I'm very proud of my contribution alongside all these other amazing people, women mostly, who have fought.
Great. And what about you, Helen? Do you regret?
No, I don't.
Oh, you've frozen for me. You froze there, Helen. Do you want to
Okay, I'll start again.
Yeah.
Right, I have no idea why it didn't do anything for me. I don't regret anything. I wish that I could rewrite some sections, just because, in journalism, you're used to things going out and then, they're fish and chips wrapper the next day and it's on to the next thing. So that's been a strange experience, writing something that's meant to be sort of set in stone and having it treated like that. I have lost a lot. I think we all have. And I think it's important that somebody like me, who hasn't lost anything very visible, can say that too. I haven't been hounded out of my job. I haven't suffered mental health issues. I haven't lost close family, as some people have. I think what I've lost is a sort of sunny confidence that the institutions that we have around us are functional. And that's a strange experience, again, that reminds me of being in Brazil, where nobody really trusts things like the police and the government. I mean, not at all, in fact. And you don't know until you've lost those things what an immense psychological support and comfort it is to believe that you live in a fundamentally rational and safe world. Bad things happen, but they mostly happen to bad people. And everyone who's ever been attacked or, raped or suffered domestic violence knows that's not true. And in therapy, one of the things you have to do is to learn to trust people again. Well, I was one of those ignorant people who thought that good things happened to good people. And now I know that's not true. And that feels like a big loss. On the other hand, I've gained a lot. So I think I was a fool. I think I didn't know the world around me. And that's a big indictment for a journalist, to not know what's going on around you, to be so ignorant, to have been surprised by Brexit, surprised by Trump, surprised by sex denialism, hat trick in 5 years. I think it's better to understand how things can be and to understand, to see the world more clearly. But the experience of losing your comforting fictions is painful. And the way that I would cope with it and the way that I would advise other people to do it, like mostly I also just try to find it very entertaining. Like what is happening is not funny. I know that. It's anything but funny. It's also bloody hysterically funny. Like it's absolutely outrageously funny that there are people who think that men can be women and women can be men. And I try to remember that, and my sense of humor helps me through that. I have learned to be quite hardened to being shamed. I don't think I worried very much about shame before, but I think that people who haven't experienced it think that the worst bit's the threats. Like everyone who writes about Kathleen says, oh, she needed to put security on her door. I very much doubt that was anything like as bad as the feeling of walking surrounded by people and feeling that people are staring at you. I remember when I first wrote about this and tried to defend my ideas in an editorial meeting, genuinely feeling like I had a big scarlet T on my forehead as I walked around the office, not knowing what people around me thought, but knowing that some of them thought that I was a bigot. Unless you've experienced that, you have no idea how terrible it is. It's the experience of being brought to the pillory. And, you know, I think we wildly underestimate how bad that is for people until, you know, so in many ways, it's mostly just that I feel I know a lot more than I did. I wouldn't say to other people to let it put them off. I would say, if your family are okay, hopefully you'll be okay, which is the same as I always said to foreign correspondents as well. Get your friends around you. Say what people say to children if they've got any sense, which is, why would you worry about what people you don't respect think about you? I mean, the people who tell these lies about all of us here, I don't respect these people. So why would I care what they think? And, you know, be hygienic about things like Twitter, turn off the notifications, close your DMs, don't search your name, all those things.
You raised some really important points. And I think, you know, one of them is that we can't see how these things affect women. We look at the strongest women out there, don't we? And I know that you know, that strength, it's going to be taking a lot of toll as well, but that we can't see. And I also think there's a sort of, you know, for women, there's a kind of, we're all in a state of this kind of existential crisis, aren't we? It is psychologically really distressing what's happening with the erasure of women, that we're facing it full on. I can understand why people choose not to, because it is erasure, and that's very distressing. So thank you so much for coming on and joining in this webinar and supporting Transgender Trend. I'm so full of admiration for both of you, and for what you've done, and for your standing up and speaking out in such a public way from your very public positions. So thank you so much for coming on, and I'm going to end this webinar because we're going into the Q&A now, just to dedicate it to J.K. Rowling on that subject of strong women speaking out, just because she's written a few books and she's spoken out, and she's never she's never issued that groveling apology. She has stood firm and given strength to so many women, which I think is the same for everybody here at participants in the webinar today. Everybody who publishes a book gives permission to somebody else to do it, gives permission to another publisher to have that confidence. So I think everybody here today has played their part in creating a society where we can discuss these issues openly, we can critique, we can question. So huge thanks to you.